The world didn't end in a storm or a courtroom. It cracked open in aisle 7 under fluorescent lights, with cereal boxes staring like witnesses. A 7-year-old voice rang out sharp, rehearsed, cruel in the way only borrowed adult words can be. "I don't have to listen to you. Mommy said you're not my real grandma?" Gasps, camera phones, a tide of eyes. My fingers whitened on the cart. Somewhere far away, the store's music kept playing, oblivious. In that instant, I understood this wasn't a tantrum. It was a message. Christopher's blue eyes, so much like David's at that age, burned with certainty. I crouched despite the ache in my knees and said his name softly. He crossed his arms in a pose I knew from his mother. Arya, chin stiff, mouth small and hard. He repeated the line about pictures and truth, and how even Daddy didn't know yet. But Mommy would tell him soon. Every word stung. But what terrified me was the precision of it. Someone had loaded a child like a slingshot and aimed him at my heart. I wheeled our cart to the exit while whispers followed us, while my grandson muttered about fake grandmas and real ones. The 15 minutes home dragged like a punishment. He stared out the window, a soldier who believed his orders were righteous. When Arya opened the door, she wore a smile that stopped at her eyes. She ruffled his hair, asked about shopping, then let the mask slip just enough to aim a dagger. "I know what you did." "Janet, I know the secret you've kept for 35 years. David will know soon." "Too." The door closed before I could answer. I stood on the porch with my pulse in my ears and a cold certainty rising she was about to light gasoline. Sleep wouldn't touch me. By the time the ceiling fan ticked into a rhythm that sounded like a countdown, I was in my office with a lamp casting a small circle against the dark. The old filing cabinet groaned when I pulled the bottom drawer. I hadn't touched those papers in years. I had told no one, not my closest friend, not my church circle, not even David. I kept adoption where I had kept my grief after Robert's accident, in a quiet drawer with a lock only I could open. The envelope was still there, yellowed, edges soft from time. Sarah Morrison, 16 years old, no father listed. St. Mary's Catholic Charities, a 6-month-old boy placed into our arms after we had spent years trying and failing. After doctors and bills and a silence that made the house ache. We called him David. The paperwork had been clean, closed, compassionate. He was wanted. He was loved. That was the only truth I had needed. But now, a different truth pressed in 2 copies of everything. One for our records, one for the state. A system, a registry, doors that remained locked unless someone went looking with a badge. A favor or a clever violation. I thought of Arya at Henderson Medical Group, gliding through billing like a queen on polished floors. I thought of David telling me, just weeks ago, that she wanted to do genealogy and had ordered a test. I had smiled then, imagining a family treecraft on the fridge. Now the memory tasted like metal. By mid-morning, I was dialing numbers at St. Mary's. A kind voice confirmed the records were sealed, accessible only to the adoptee after 18, and added the words no one ever wants to hear. There have been breaches over the years. My old neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, remembered a pretty teenager in a blue Honda idling across our house when David was 4 or 5. She never made trouble. She said, just watching. A mother is a kind of weather. Honey, sometimes she can't help where she goes. I hung up queasy and thought of all the ways a rumor can become a rope. The glass lobby at Henderson shone too bright when I walked in. The receptionist's reading glasses flashed as she told me Arya had taken personal time that day and that old records lived in a storage maze with gatekeepers and forms. Then she leaned in, because women my age recognize each other's worry between us. Arya's been asking about those records too. Something about genealogy. She knew her way around the old system better than most. I thanked her and walked to the car with my heart pounding. It wasn't an innocent curiosity. It was excavation. When the phone rang at 7:37 p.m., I saw David's name and felt the ground tilt. He didn't say hello. He said, "Mom, we need to talk." And the warmth I count on every Sunday was gone from his voice. Arya had planned something, and she wanted me in the room when it detonated. At their door. David looked like a man who had seen a ghost and wasn't sure whether to welcome it or run. In the living room, Arya had laid out a spread like a prosecutor laptop. Folders, photocopies. She turned the screen to show an original birth certificate with a name that wasn't the one I had whispered as a lullaby. She clicked, and a decree of adoption filled the screen. She spoke gently. The way people speak when they want their blade to go in clean. Your mother adopted you when you were a baby. David's knees gave, and he sat as if pushed. I opened my mouth to say what mattered: chosen, wanted, loved, but Arya kept slicing. She added a story of letters and doorstep visits, of a birth mother begging at the edges of a closed file while I, the wicked gate, refused. She held up notes in a teenager's looping hand that conveniently painted me as sentinel and thief. David's face crumpled. I watched my son's narrative, the one I had tended like a garden, begin to scorch. My voice came at last, hoarse and steady, and I told him the adoption had been closed by agreement, that I had acted from love and not fear, that Robert's death 2 months before finalization had complicated, not corrupted, the process. Arya lifted her eyebrows and suggested darker motives: grief, desperation, a woman clinging to a baby because biology had failed her. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when a family realizes it is a courtroom. I took a breath and looked past her paperwork to her eyes. There, I found the real story control, insecurity, scarcity. I asked David about wills and suggestions and how slowly a marriage can be walled off by whispered warnings. His gaze shifted. Her mask slipped. She said she was protecting her family. I said love doesn't shrink to fit one person's fear. Then I asked for proof: the investigator's name, the originals, the legal authority that opened sealed files. Arya stalled. David straightened, something steady returning to his face. Where did you get these documents? He asked. And the air in the room changed. David's voice had an edge I rarely heard. The sharpness of a man who had spent his life trusting too easily and suddenly realized that trust might have been misplaced. Arya froze, then stammered something about a private investigator, about having his information at work, about genealogy. The way her eyes darted gave her away. I pressed gently, but with the force of a truth that could no longer wait. Did you use your position at the medical center, Arya? Did you dig through records you had no right to see, or worse? Did you create what you couldn't find? Her lips parted, but no sound came. David stepped back as if distance might make sense appear. Answer her, he said. Arya's composure cracked. She lashed out instead, demanding to know why he was taking my side, why he believed me over her. Her voice rose with panic, but David's reply was low and cutting. Because my mother has never lied to me. And you've been planting seeds of doubt for months. He pointed at the photocopied diary pages. This handwriting doesn't even match. Look. His hands shook as he compared the signature I'd shown him from Sarah Morrison's adoption papers. The difference was obvious. Arya flinched. The room felt heavy, each second stretching. Arya tried one last maneuver, tears sliding down her cheeks, insisting she had only wanted David to know his true roots, that she was protecting Christopher from lies. Her voice was trembling, but behind it, I still heard calculation. That was when I told David about my phone call with Mrs. Peterson, how Arya had persuaded an elderly woman into telling a story that never happened. David turned to his wife, disbelief giving way to anger. You involved Mrs. Peterson? You made her lie. Arya's defenses crumbled. For a flicker of a moment, she looked less like a schemer and more like a terrified young woman who had built her marriage on insecurity and fear of not being enough. She admitted the truth in fragments that she felt overshadowed by me, that every holiday and every decision seemed filtered through what Mom thinks, that she wanted to be the only woman who mattered in David's life. Her confession wasn't noble. It was raw and childish, but at least it was honest. David pulled back, running his hands through his hair. That's what this was about, not genealogy, not truth, just jealousy. His voice cracked. Do you realize what you've done to Christopher? To me, to my mother? Arya sobbed that she had been afraid he would choose me over her. That in her mind, she had to tear me down before I erased her place in his life. I stepped forward then, not as a victim, but as someone who had weathered storms before. It isn't fair, Arya, I said softly. It isn't fair that I raised David while his birth mother carried grief. It isn't fair that I got to witness his milestones while she missed them all. And it isn't fair that you feel pushed aside in your own marriage. But tearing down one love doesn't build another. Love multiplies. It doesn't divide. For the first time, Arya really listened. Her shoulders sagged. Her sobs quieted. David, torn between anger and love, pulled her into his arms. You should have talked to me, he whispered. We could have fixed this together. The storm of accusations began to ease, replaced by silence and the beginning of reckoning. The weeks that followed were not easy. Christopher needed gentle explanations, reassurance that I was his real grandmother, no matter what words had been planted in him. David and I had long, difficult talks about why I had never shared the truth of his adoption. He wept, then forgave, then asked questions that deserved answers. Arya carried shame like a heavy coat, but slowly, painfully, she began to change. David set clear boundaries, no more manipulation, no more lies, and absolute honesty about her fears instead of covert sabotage. 3 months later, sunlight poured into my kitchen as Christopher stood on a stool measuring flour into a bowl, his tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. He looked up and said quietly, Mommy told me she's sorry for making me say those things. You're my real grandma. Right? I hugged him. Flour and all. Yes. Sweetheart, family isn't about who grows you in their tummy. It's about who loves you and shows up every day. He nodded, repeating what David had told him. Love isn't like pie. It's like sunlight. That afternoon, David and Arya arrived with flowers and hesitant smiles. Arya handed me a small, silver frame holding a photo of me and Christopher tangled in Christmas lights, both laughing. I took it, she said softly. I realized what I had never seen before. You weren't taking him from me. You were giving him something more. For the first time since I had known her. Her smile reached her eyes. She admitted then that she had found real information about Sarah Morrison, simple and clean yearbook photos, a nurse who married, had more children, still alive, no fabricated diaries, No tragic letters. Just a woman who made a hard choice. David held the photo for a long time, then shook his head. Maybe someday I'll reach out, but not now, right now. I'm focusing on the family I have. We baked cookies together. 4 hands measuring, stirring, tasting dough that stuck to our fingers. For the first time in months, laughter filled the house without shadows. I watched my son hug his wife, watched my grandson beam at both of us, and I felt a lesson settle deep in my bones. Biology determines where you begin, but love decides where you belong. The healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, like stitching after a tear. Some days were easier than others. Christopher returned to his natural sweetness quickly, children being mercifully resilient. Yet sometimes, in quiet moments, I caught him studying me as if testing the truth for himself. Each time I met his gaze with steady love, making sure he saw no doubt in my eyes. "I'm still your grandma," I'd whisper, and he'd nod, reassured. David, though, carried the weight longer. Late-night phone calls stretched between us, sometimes filled with silence more than words. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked one night, his voice heavy. "I grew up thinking I was yours in every way. If you had trusted me enough to share, maybe Arya wouldn't have had this weapon." His hurt stung sharper than Arya's lies ever had. I explained again how Robert's death had left me terrified of losing the only family I had. How I believed protecting his identity would give him stability. "I wanted you to belong fully, without shadows," I said. He was quiet, then finally sighed. "I understand, Mom, but secrets always find cracks." It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was a path. Arya's journey was the most complicated. At first, she seemed determined to shrink into guilt, shoulders bent, voice small. But David refused to let her wallow. He told her plainly that her deception had been dangerous, that another such betrayal would cost their marriage. She wept, promising never again to pit love against love. When she came to my house, weeks later with the framed photo, I recognized a different woman, not fully transformed, but softened, humbled. Her apology was halting, but real. One evening, after Christopher was asleep upstairs, Arya lingered at my kitchen table, her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "I hated you," she admitted. "Every smile you shared with David, every inside joke, every memory I wasn't part of it felt like proof I'd never measure up. I thought if I could make you smaller, I'd finally feel bigger." I listened, not defending myself, not scolding. "What changed?" I asked. She looked at the photo frame on my mantel. "I realized you weren't my rival. You were my example. Watching how you loved David, even when he disappointed you, that's the kind of mother I want to be." For the first time, I believed her. The fragile truce grew roots in small rituals. Sunday dinners became whole again. We baked cookies, planted flowers in the backyard, took Christopher to the park. Arya didn't hover with suspicion anymore. Instead, she asked questions, sought advice, even laughed with me at Christopher's antics. David's smile grew lighter, his shoulders less burdened. Slowly, the cracks in our family began to seal, but the shadow of Sarah Morrison still lingered, like a door we all knew existed but hesitated to open. Arya, seeking redemption, took it upon herself to search legitimately this time, through public records and genealogy sites. She uncovered a yearbook photo of a solemn-eyed girl who looked hauntingly like David. Sarah had gone on to finish school, become a nurse, marry, and have 2 more children. She lived quietly a few hours north, still alive. When Arya revealed this, David held the photo for a long time. His face shifted between wonder and fear. "Do you want to meet her?" I asked gently. His answer was a slow shake of the head. "Not now. I need to be sure of who I am with the family I have before I go looking for the family I lost." I nodded, understanding. The past would wait until he was ready. 3 months after that fateful night, our family gathered in my kitchen again. Christopher stood on his stool, tongue poking from his mouth as he carefully cracked eggs into the mixing bowl. Flour dusted the counters. The sunlight fell in golden stripes, and the smell of vanilla filled the air. "Grandma," he said suddenly, "Daddy says love is like sunlight, not pie." He grinned proudly. "And you give me lots of sunlight." My eyes blurred with tears as I hugged him tight. When David and Arya arrived, there was no tension this time, no hidden agenda. Arya hugged me without hesitation. David placed sunflowers in a vase, his smile easy, unguarded. We rolled dough into balls, sneaking bites when we thought the others weren't looking. Laughter filled the room, warm and ordinary, the kind of sound families are built on. In that moment, I realized the truth I wished Arya had known sooner. Love doesn't weaken when shared. It grows brighter, stronger, more resilient. Families fracture when fear tries to hoard affection, but they heal when love multiplies freely. We were proof of that, now scarred. Yes, but stitched back together with stronger thread. As the cookies cooled and Christopher proudly announced, "They're perfect." I looked around at the faces I loved. My son, my grandson, my daughter-in-law. Not perfect, not without shadows, but ours. Family isn't about who gave you life. It's about who makes your life worth living. So I ask you, listening now, what would you have done in my place? Have you faced a moment where truth threatened to break your family apart? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so more people can hear these lessons about love, forgiveness, and what family truly means.